Let me take you back to a time when Pokemon wasn't terrible and people had hopes for the Wii U. Back before even Pikmin 3's release, there was a series of two games, under the titles of Pikmin and Pikmin 2. Now, when I was first introduced to these games, I never really had a chance to play them myself, at the very least whenever I was younger. How I was introduced to this series was through Let's Plays and reviews, and a common opinion I saw amongst those, which never made sense to me as a child, was that Pikmin 1 was better than 2. This didn't make sense. Pikmin 2 is, well, Pikmin but more. How could it be worse? But in that long span of time, being actually able to play these games, my opinion has very much shifted. Now, I feel like this is important that I make clear. I do not think that Pikmin 2 is a bad game. I think it's the weakest of the three, maybe, potentially, possibly 4, and there are things that I actually like about Pikmin 2. I think that visually compared to 1, it's night and day comparing the two, and it's still a very nice looking GameCube game. I think that how it handles the introductions to the 5 types of Pikmin is done a lot better than Pikmin 3. And 2 Captains, while I don't think Pikmin 2 takes the best advantage of it, is still a great addition. Also, I like White Pikmin. But the game has many problems that keeps me from being able to fully enjoy it. Let's just start off with one of the main mechanics of Pikmin 2. The story of Pikmin 2 picks up immediately after Pikmin 1, in which Olimar arrives back on his home planet to only learn that his company has gone into debt. He, with his new assistant Louie, have to immediately fly back to the planet because the president is an asshole to pay off that debt. This will mostly be done through product placement, I mean treasures, which include real Nintendo products, fake Nintendo products, advertisements, and things. Like this thing. The majority of these treasures will be found through the underground cave systems found throughout the planet. Unlike the above ground, these caves have no time limit, you cannot reproduce Pikmin at least through the traditional way, and they are semi-randomly generated. This is likely all an attempt to fit into Pikmin 2's idea to being more player-friendly, along with there being infinite amount of days unlike the first game's 30. While this is all nice and good, that's not how Pikmin 2 actually operates. Pikmin 2 is probably the most difficult entry in the series. But what makes caves bad? Well, let's dissect what I previously just said. Firstly being that you can't reproduce Pikmin. This is not too much of an issue as there's more than enough ways to obtain new Pikmin within caves. I don't really think it's a problem unless it's your first time through the game. The only exceptions to this I could think of would be enemies like the Fiery Bullblacks or level designs like this floor, which seem to misunderstand how Pikmin 2's caves work. Next would be the random generation and the lack of time limits within caves. Why am I covering these at the same time? Well, it's because I can't really critique one without mentioning the other. So, what's wrong with these? Well, outside of being completely antithetical to the entire design of the series, these functions cause the caves to be very monotonous. The random generation causes the caves to be a lot simpler in comparison to the overworld. And while the lack of time limits isn't a direct cause of anything, it does immensely slow down the general gameplay. To make these simplistic floors stimulating, they have to fill them with various enemies, geysers, and occasional bomb rocks. This is what causes the slow pacing of the game, in which you need to go through the process of killing every hazard that's in your way to collect every treasure, and repeat for about 7-ish floors to fight a boss who range from underwhelming to annoying. This is not me trying to shit on the roguelike genre. There are games from that genre I quite enjoy. However, the caves themselves are a massive departure of what you do in the above ground. In many ways, they strip away functions that you perform in the above ground, even stripping away the usefulness of new functions. For example, 2 captains. 2 captains within caves is kinda useless, outside of a few bosses, that is. And even the new white and purple Pikmin have a few of their abilities basically reduced to nothing. Now, this is not me saying they are useless in caves. They do carry functionality within caves. Oh, trust me, I will talk about their abilities later. But their basic abilities, such as the white Pikmin's higher speed, or the purple Pikmin's abilities to carry with the strength of 10, are basically non-existent within the function of caves, as, well, you don't need to go faster. You don't need a Pikmin doing the job of 10. Without time limits, these functions have no real purpose. I would also be remiss not to talk about Pikmin 2's enemies. While not a direct problem with the caves, because you spend the majority of your time underground, it makes sense to me to at least talk about a few of them here. Pikmin 2's revamped Bulbears, unlike their Pikmin 1 counterparts which are just harder Bulborbs, these guys run around levels, and the second they notice you, because the level design is rubbish, they will chase you to the ends of the earth to hunt down all your Pikmin. They also have a very fun mechanic, in which they don't believe in the concept of dying after death. Don't bring them back to your base to get those 7 Pokos, they will come back to life. This is a function they share with just the worst piece of shit, the Gatling Groink. Outside of resembling that one fish bastard who thought he was too good for the ocean, these guys fire explosive shots with hitboxes I don't remotely understand, and they have a riot shield that prevents Pikmin from attacking them from the front. These two, along with the fiery Bulblacks, make for an unholy trinity. I like to call the, how do I fight these guys without Ultra Bitter Spray? Like, actually, what am I supposed to do against them? On the less frustrating and more annoying side of things would be the small-bodied bug boys, known as Dweevils. They embody the 5 elements of fire, water, electricity, poison, and explosions. They only exist to annoy the player by picking up the treasures that you find throughout the dungeons. I honestly, most of the time whenever I see them, just hope that they pick up the deceased enemies around them instead of the treasures themselves. Mostly because their small bodies make them really hard to hit. Next would be the rock-firing armor cannon larva. By themselves, they're not too hard to deal with, but whenever they come in multiples, you better hope that they are able to kill each other, because otherwise, encounters with these things usually involve Olimar having to punch them to death. And let's not forget Tingle's Insect Sona over here, whose one goal in life is just to throw bomb rocks at you. No, they don't take any damage from them, for some reason, but those explosions sure will hit you through the walls. Speaking of bombs, traps. Traps are the worst thing in Pikmin 2. Initially starting out as harmless nectar eggs, they go on to become enemies, bombs, bomb-emies, and falling rocks. They exist as a proverbial middle finger for the player. They punish you for just playing the game. Wanna dig up this treasure? No. You wanna move this treasure back to the base? No. Do you want to move at all? No. One of the worst examples I can think of comes from the Dream Den, in which the game just drops a Bulbear on you. Yes, by the way, you do have to kill it. Outside of being 1/13 of the reasons why the Dream Den is the worst cave in the game, it's a greater example of how Pikmin 2 doesn't respect the player. The main problem isn't that Pikmin 2 is a hard game. The problem is that it just throws a lot of bullshit at you. But I know that someone who didn't watch the entire video has probably already mentioned them. You probably noticed them throughout the video, so let's take a second to talk about the purple elephant in the room. In defense of Pikmin 2, I will admit that Pikmin as a series has never been perfect about balancing the individual types of Pikmin. In Pikmin 1, yellow Pikmin were significantly less useful than reds and blues, although this was just because their unique gimmicks were taken away in place for a generic ability that all Pikmin were originally intended to have. And in Pikmin 3, wing Pikmin are a lot more useful than the other 4, although they are not as overpowered as the example we're going to be giving in Pikmin 2. Within Pikmin 2, purple Pikmin completely outshine the other 4 types of Pikmin, with them doing 3 times the amount of damage of the average Pikmin, along with homing onto smaller targets and even a stunning thud. They're significantly a lot stronger than the other 4 types of Pikmin. Purple Pikmin exists as an attempt to band-aid several of the game's problems. And while sure, they do make the game easier, they also outshine a good chunk of the other Pikmin, given to Pikmin 2's much heavier combat focus. Red Pikmin especially suffer from this, given to the fact that Purple Pikmin deal twice as much damage as them, basically making Reds only useful for whenever dealing with fire, which outside of the occasional burning statue is basically a non-hazard. Yeah, guess which one of these was not originally designed to be destructible? I feel like White Pikmin are also in a similar league to the Reds. While not actively screwed over by Purple Pikmin, that's the cave's job. To justify Purple Pikmin's unwielding strength, they made them a rare commodity only available through Violet Candy Pop Buds. However, likely because they thought it would be awkward to introduce two new types of Pikmin, one with an onion and one without, White Pikmin got the same treatment, and they are nowhere as powerful as Purple Pikmin are. With their higher speed and immunity to poison, you can tell that they were designed more with the tendencies of the first three than they were with Purples. This is likely why, upon death, they poison enemies who eat them. And it sucks. Okay, I get that there are a lot of people who consider this to be the main ability of White Pikmin. Okay, which one of these sounds more efficient? Sacrificing one White Pikmin to kill an enemy, or doing it the way God intended and throwing 10 fat people at the problem until it dies? I get that this would help me with some of the problematic enemies I mentioned earlier. However, I don't like purposely sacrificing Pikmin. It just feels wrong, okay? But Purple Pikmin aren't done screwing over White Pikmin in Pikmin 2. Oh no, they had to screw them over in Pikmin 3. I think it's relatively obvious that Purple and White Pikmin were intended to be in the story mode of Pikmin 3, but were likely cut because Purple Pikmin were too hard to balance. Their limited use within Pikmin 3 demonstrates how much they suck in that game. Let alone did they lose their homing, and their thud, along with the fact that they don't latch onto enemies whenever they land on them for some reason, ironically making them really bad at combat. While they still carry their 3 times damage, it doesn't really remedy the problem. And it's on full display as to how hard purples are to balance, given to the fact that they either have to be immensely overpowered or immensely underpowered. Compare that to how whites are in Pikmin 3 and it's night and day. The only thing that really changed about whites from Pikmin 2 to 3 was that their death poisoning deals a lot less damage. However, because the two of them were considered a pair, the White Pikmin had to get dragged down with the purples. Now, I don't want to make this into Purple Man bad for hurting White Man. I like both Purple and White Pikmin, at least on some conceptual levels. While I much prefer White Pikmin, I actually do like things about Purple Pikmin, specifically their ability to carry with the strength of 10. This is a cool concept, and honestly what they should be focused around, rather than being some uber damage class. Whenever Pikmin 4 releases in like 20 years, if I were to redesign Purple Pikmin, how I would probably handle it is, firstly get rid of their 3 times damage, just give them the same damage ratio as Red Pikmin. It wouldn't make one outshine the other and would keep their focus as combat type Pikmin. Keep the 10 times carry weight, because that's a cool concept, and I would probably change their throwing arc as well. Maybe something along the lines of them having a lower throwing arc to fit the yellow Pikmin's higher throwing arc, given to the fact that they're supposed to be heavyweight Pikmin. It would also fit into the idea that they're more limited in mobility. If it's not obvious, Pikmin 2 is my least favorite amongst the 3. Where I can always go back to Pikmin's 1 and 3, I don't really do that for 2. I just don't think 2 is fun. I felt the need to include the bit at the beginning, as I felt like many people who like Pikmin 2 make the same mistake I did all those years ago. No, I'm not saying that people who like Pikmin 2 have never played it. What I mean is, whenever they say they like Pikmin 2 for this and that, it's very surface level. Whenever you delve deeper into the game, that's where a lot of its issues come in. Now, there are some people who say they like Pikmin 2 because it has infinite replayability potential. I disagree with that, personally. I think that the caves embody everything that's uninteresting about Pikmin. Like, I don't play Pikmin for its combat. I play it for multitasking, for collecting things. Sure, Pikmin 2 has a lot more to collect, but it's not very interesting to collect it. I think that Pikmin 2 is a prime example in which one could definitely say more is not better. So, this is where the conclusion of the video would go, but I don't know how to finish videos, so here's some footage of a purple Pikmin spinning in the air.